In today's lesson, we're going to explore why did the American Rebellion become a revolution? Why did the American Rebellion become the American Revolution? Or do now, teens frequently get into arguments with their parents. They often refuse to follow their parents' rules. Sometimes they even run away for a little while. Yet it is very rare when teenagers ever get themselves legally emancipated from their parents. What holds the kids back from doing that? Come up with the biggest list you can. So, what's the difference between a rebellion and a revolution? If you want to understand this lesson, you got to understand these two basic concepts. A rebellion is a simple protest for change, whereas a revolution is the overthrow of government and starting a new one. Tricky questions. Look at the definitions carefully again. Are all revolutions necessarily violent? And when was the last revolution in America? All right, so let's look at John Adams' proposal at this time in history. First of all, he said that we should declare independence, which would be a revolution, our definition. We would no longer follow England's rule and we'd form our own government. Each colony would set up its own government and make the Boston militia into the Continental Army. They would be fighting for all of us. All right, so those are the three things at this time that John Adams is proposing. We're going to take this rebellion and make it into a revolution doing these three steps. All right, here's your do now. Pretend you are a member of the Continental Congress. This is the group that the states have set up to collectively deal with the problem of English abuses. Explain whether and why you think John Adams' proposal is a good one or not. All right, is this a good idea or not? I'm going to rewind for a second. Are these three ideas a good idea or bad idea in your mind if you are a colonist? All right, explain whether and why you think John Adams' proposal is a good one or not. And I'll give you a big hint here. Think back to the being legally separated from your parents metaphor. If you were a colonist at this time during the American Rebellion, would you want to follow John Adams' ideas? You think they're a good idea or a bad idea or not, and why? And then you can discuss it with your class. All right, so what did the real Continental Congress think? I can tell you what I would have thought, and I would have agreed with the real Continental Congress. Most colonists thought that John Adams was way too extreme. These ideas simply aren't going to work. While they're mad about taxes, closing the Boston Harbor, etc., the colonists still loved being English citizens and thought they could resolve their differences amicably. In addition, it's kind of crazy the idea of the Boston militia taking on potentially the entire English army and navy. That doesn't seem particularly practical to just declare our independence. You know, we were living with our parents, England, for way too long. We're too used to their way of life. It's not practical to just separate and be our own country. Kind of a crazy idea Adams came up with. So, if Adams was seen as an extremist, then why did we ultimately have a revolution in this country? Why in the United States why did the colonists ultimately decide to leave England and form their own country? There are three reasons why the American Rebellion became the American Revolution. All right, I will tell you the reasons. You must think and tell me why this caused a rebellion to become a revolution. All right, I'm going to tell you the reasons, and then you're going to tell me why. Why would that cause one to become the other? All right, you're going to have to think on your own and talk to your classmates about this. All right, number one, the Olive Branch petition was rejected by King George III. What was the Olive Branch petition? Continental Congress decided to profess their loyalty to the king, and they wrote him a letter urging a return to former harmony. Said, let's go back to the way things were. I understand that there have been heated disputes between us. There's been some violence, but let's go back to the way things used to be. All right, so they wrote that letter, and the king declared the colonists in a formal state of treason. All right. Treason is when you are declared. It's basically the highest crime there is against the government. It's when whoever is in charge, whether it be the king or the president, declares that you are trying to overthrow the government. All right. So that's what the Olive Branch petition is, and that's what happened to it. But why would that cause a rebellion to become a revolution? You're going to have to think of that answer for yourself. All right. Number two. George III hired Hessians. All right. Then the second reason why the American Rebellion became the American Revolution was that George III, the king, hired Hessians. And who were Hessians? They were German mercenaries. And if you don't know who mercenaries are, they're soldiers for hire. All right. They're soldiers for hire. All right. So you're going to have to think about why would George III hiring German mercenaries or soldiers for hire cause an American rebellion to become an American revolution? Why would that cause Americans to stop protesting and start saying that, okay, that's it, we have to form our own government now? All right. And lastly, number three, Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense. Common Sense is one of the most famous books in American history. All right, and what did it say? It said that a small island cannot control a continent. It makes no sense that England is a small island and is controlling the whole of the colonies. It also said that Thomas Paine also wrote that England's 3,000 miles away. It is simply impractical for England to try to rule the colonies. Anytime they wanted to send a directive or a message, it would take 6 months or 3 to 6 months to cross the ocean in order to even receive the message. This makes no sense. Americans should be ruling themselves. And lastly, that kings are naturally tyrannical and that republican governments are best. When kings have absolute power without checks, they're naturally abusive. And when governments are held responsible to the people, because the people have the right to vote, that those governments tend to be better functioning. So this is a pretty easy one. Why would Thomas Paine, writing the book Common Sense, cause the Americans to stop protesting and start demanding or start a war, demanding that they have their independence and their own government? All right, so let's go through those three again really quickly. Three reasons why a rebellion became a revolution. First, the olive branch petition was rejected by the king, and the king said the colonists are in a formal state of treason. Second, George III hired Hessians, which are German mercenaries. And third, Thomas Paine wrote a book called Common Sense that many Americans read. Why would those three things cause the American Rebellion to become an American Revolution? And here is your assignment. All right, here's your exam. Today, first you learned that most colonists were reluctant or hesitant to actually break away from England and form their own country. They wanted to rebel, sure, just like teenagers want to rebel, but they didn't want to legally emancipate themselves and say, I'm my own, I'm going to move out, or in this case, I'm going to form my own country now. All right. You then learn that there are three reasons why the colonists did, in fact, start the American Revolution. Even though they didn't want to, they ultimately started a war and wanted to fight for their independence. Why did they do that? All right. First question. Why did each of these three reasons, so you want to talk about them, cause the American Rebellion to become the American Revolution? You have to think and tell me in one paragraph. And second, in your opinion, of the three reasons why the American Rebellion became the American Revolution, which was the biggest, which was the second biggest, and which was the least important factor? Explain in one paragraph.